Hi, I'm Emily with Chipped and Polished. Today I wanted to share the makeover of this bed with you. Starting off, it was really dirty, so I started with an awesome cleaner from the dollar store. I just mixed it with water and started scrubbing it down. After scrubbing, I gave it a good rinse just to get any of the residue off of it. It had some veneer that I was hoping to glue back down, but after everything was dry, I realized it was going to be just too far gone to get it back in place right. I worked at it slowly with a 5-in-1 tool just to start peeling it back, and this side actually came off really easily. It only took a few minutes to do. It was just a little bit of back and forth. I recommend that you definitely go slow and be careful here with it. You don't want to gouge the wood or accidentally hit your fingers or anything. And I would just like to say that in 8 years of doing furniture, I have never had a piece of veneer pop off in a single sheet like that. Of course, after the first side being so easy, this side decided to be stubborn. Again, it was just back and forth working in different areas to get off what I could until there were no more loose areas on here. Once I had gotten off all of the loose bits, this is what I was left with. I decided to go ahead and use a steamer on it to loosen up any of the glue that was under there so I could start prying it off that way. Another way to do this would be to use an iron and a towel or even a heat gun. Again, you definitely want to be careful with that 5-in-1 tool here or anything you're using to pry that off because you don't want to gouge the wood. The next day, it was time to start sanding, so I was using a 120 grit here just to smooth anything out and try and get any of the remaining bits of glue off. I had actually started on this project before and not finished it, so it had a lot of leftover paint in all of the nooks and crannies. So I decided to use some citrus strip on it, and I just applied it with a chip brush. Also added a little bit just to this spot just because it had some glue on it that was being stubborn. My advice with this stripper would be to apply it thickly, work in sections, and cover it with a plastic wrap so it doesn't dry out. Once the stripper had had time to work its magic, working in sections, I started peeling off the plastic so I could remove all of the residue. Citrus strip is water soluble, so I started by spraying it with water. After that, I used a wire stripping brush to get in all of the nooks and crannies and just scrub everything up some. After spraying them with water a second time, I used fine steel wool to get any of the leftover residue off. After that, I took my 5-in-1 tool again just to get down into the really hard to reach areas or any stubborn pieces of paint that hadn't come back up. And again, anytime you're using this 5-in-1 tool or anything like it, you want to be careful not to gouge the wood or hit your fingers. Once all of the stripper was cleaned off, it was time to start hand sanding those details. Again, just using either a 150 or 120 grit here or something in the middle to get everything smooth. And went around each of the posts with that. Whenever you're sanding, you always want to make sure that you're sanding with the grain as much as possible. After sanding, I had a few areas that needed to be filled in with some wood filler. And then I had the veneer. It was really dry and had a lot of like little tiny cracks. So I did a mixture of wood filler and water just to thin it out so it was easier to fill everything in. Once all of the wood filler dried, I went ahead and sanded over the flat areas with my sander one more time and hand sanded any of the fine details that it needed to be filled in. And here you can just kind of see me checking to make sure everything's smooth as I go, making sure that I don't need to go back over any areas. Once I was finished sanding, I got a damp microfiber cloth to get all of the dust off and clean it up again, paying special attention to any of the nooks and crannies to make sure they were dust free. After that, I had noticed that the rails were really red, and so was the footboard after removing that veneer, so I got some spray shellac and gave it a coat. And this was just to protect against bleed through so it wouldn't show up red through the paint. Once the shellac was dry, I went ahead and primed it using the Zenisser 123 primer in the spray version. I didn't film it because it was getting dark at the time, but that dried overnight, and then I sanded it smooth using a 220 grit, and then it was finally time to paint. And this piece was actually for a romance core challenge, so I decided that I wanted to do a blend of a couple of different pinks and a green. So I chose the Conservatory color and Peony from Fusion, and then I had soft pink on hand already from Dixie Belle. So when you're blending, you're going to need one paintbrush for each of your main colors, and then you're going to need a dry brush for in between those two colors. So for instance, I had one brush for my green, one brush for Peony, and one brush for soft pink. Then I had a separate brush for in between soft pink and Peony, and a brush for in between the Peony and the Conservatory. Throughout this process, I used a mister bottle to keep my main brushes wet, and then I used paper towels to keep my blending brushes dry. If you are blending for the first time, remember it's never going to look good on the first coat. My advice would be to try it first on a sample piece of wood and to try similar colors at first. No matter what colors you're using, it's never going to look good on the first coat. The second coat is where it's going to start to all come together and get out of that ugly duckling stage. In between each coat of paint, I went ahead and sanded it smooth with a 220 grit sandpaper. After painting my last coat, sanding with that 220 grit sandpaper again, made sure everything was dust free, and went to apply my transfer. This is the Rose Celebration transfer from Redesign with Prima. Because this was for a romance core challenge, I wanted to make sure that this piece looked really girly and feminine. I did accidentally apply it a little too fast here and it bent a little bit. That's why you can see me slowly pulling it back to try and fix it. Once I gotten it all smoothed out, it was time to start burnishing it. So I like to start at the edges and then go into the middle. Finished that first round of burnishing, and then it was time to start slowly peeling it back. I like to burnish as I peel back, that way if something didn't stick, I can fix it as I go. In that top corner, I had a tiny piece that I needed to attach that was from the other sheet of the transfer. I recommend just overlapping slightly instead of going too far away. Like I said earlier, this is Redesign with Prima's Rose Celebration Transfer, and it looks like one big photo, but it's got little flowers in each of the corners. So I dissected each of those so I could have a transfer for the footboard and the headboard. And then I just played with them and overlapped them so they look like they all went together. After applying all of the transfer pieces, it's time to burnish again with a soft cloth. This is just going to get out any of the little air bubbles that might be under there. The last step in this process was just to seal it with some polyacrylic. I love those sealing sponges because they make it go on so easily. And one more time, here is that before. And this is the after. I think it came out perfectly. It was exactly what I had imagined in my head. And to me, it really says romance core. I would love to know what you think of this project in the comments below, and if you could like and subscribe, I would appreciate that also. I would also love it if you would follow me on Facebook or Instagram. If you search Chipped and Polished, you can find me there and see more projects from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful day.